Okay, so let's just kind of go back a little bit. You started your bank, it was doing well at the time. And then in August 2006, you had an interview and you said, the United States is like the Titanic, and I'm here with the lifeboat trying to get people to leave the ship. I see a real financial crisis coming for the United States. He said, and you forecast that in 2007, that the real estate prices, which had peaked, are going to come crashing down to earth.
Yeah.
So in 2006, why did you think there's going to be a major financial collapse in the coming years?
Okay, and first of all, this is, long before the bank came around. And the bank doesn't even take U.S. customers. So those warnings, didn't apply to my bank customers because my bank customers are predominantly European. It's where most of them come from. But back then, I was very worried about the U.S. economy because I understood the mistakes that the Fed was making under the leadership of Alan Greenspan. They had kept interest rates much too low. And in so doing, they inflated a bubble in real estate. And the government was helping to fuel that bubble with mortgage guarantees, whereas individuals could take out mortgages at artificially low rates, and then the government, through Fannie and Freddie, would actually guarantee the lenders that the loans would be repaid, even if the borrowers didn't have the means to do it. And Wall Street then was able to get involved, creating all sorts of packages with teaser rates and securitizing mortgages to make credit even more plentiful and cheaper and more widely available. And Americans were taking all this cheap money and bidding up real estate prices. But in addition to that, they were also using their homes as ATM machines because the prices kept going up, and they would extract equity and go out and spend it. And all that extra spending was artificially boosting the GDP as people bought stuff they couldn't afford with money they really didn't have. And I knew this was going to end in a disaster, especially for the people holding the paper, the lenders, the banks, and anybody who had loaned money, because I knew that eventually the real estate bubble would pop, real estate prices would fall, and then all these loans would go into default. And then the lenders wouldn't get their money back, and the whole pyramid would implode into a financial crisis. And that is exactly what happened. And I warned in advance about what was going to happen. And I tried to get people to prepare for that, to protect themselves.
Okay. And you mentioned the movie The Big Short. Did you actually start to short the real estate market at that point?
Well, I didn't short the real estate market. We shorted the bonds, right? That's what The Big Short was. It was shorting a particular tranche of securitized subprime mortgages. And so we did that, but in a small scale, because again, most of my clients were not wealthy enough to qualify to get into that hedge fund. Government made it very difficult for people to participate because you had to have a lot of money and it was very complicated. And so not that many of my clients got involved. I mean, some of the clients got involved. And they did really, really well in that particular fund because the mortgages that they were shorting basically went to zero, and we had sold them above par. But what I was really concerned about was that after we had this collapse in the real estate market, after Fannie and Freddie went bankrupt and all these banks failed, my concern was that the government would repeat its mistakes, lower interest rates again, print a bunch of money to try to reflate the housing bubble, reflate the stock market bubble, and that in the process, they would destroy the value of the dollar. Now, it turns out that forecast was premature. They did everything wrong that I said they would do. Quantitative easing, 0% interest rates, I predicted all that, and all those were mistakes. The Fed never should have gone down that road. It only did it because it wanted to kick the can down the road. It didn't want to have to deal with reality or the consequences of its prior mistakes. And so it made even more mistakes to delay dealing with those consequences. So I was right in understanding the mistakes the government would make following the financial crisis. And then they tripled down on those policies following COVID. But what we haven't had yet is the dollar crisis that I anticipated would be the consequence of that reckless monetary policy. I still think I'm right. We're going to have a dollar crisis. It's just going to happen later than I thought, but it's going to be even more catastrophic than I thought because the bubble is much bigger. The problems have grown much larger during the last decade of can kicking.